You've seen all this before. The disorganised lack of design in the urban habitat. Little micro edges responding to nature's passive pressure. Little edges of potential productivity. All of this can be designed. All the water flows, all the organic waste accumulation, all of this can be designed into productivity, good soil, good production. Microclimates are everywhere. Wind tunnelling and wind shelter. There are all these very passive pressures of nature to demonstrate the lesson we need to see points of positive change. That's what we're going to do. We're going to design that for you so it's easy to understand and implement. We're going to take you into the small space, the micro space, the high density of humanity, the city, the town, the urban settlement. We're going to get into those small garden spaces. We're going to show you how you can link all the different elements together. The connectivity of permaculture that gives you that matrix, that life web of design. How do ducks and their nutrient flow from their pond flow down with gravity applied as design in a garden? How does your water tank overflow to set up an irrigation system? How do your worm farms work? How do your raised beds work in relation to a wicking bed? All these different elements working on the thermal mass of your house or the streetscape. Everything you need to know that can make your life an easier energy audit and a more positive and beautiful footprint. Remove the guilt, get into the design, get that fresh food, that food that's absolutely fresh in time, short in distance, and beneficial as a therapy. These design elements are easy. We're going to take you there. We're going to apply it and we're going to explain it to you so you can do it for yourself. Welcome to urban permaculture, the most intense permaculture there is on this planet. The center of the city, the urban landscape. All this effort, all these resources channeled into the unproductive and often unused landscape of lawns. There's more water, there's more fertilizer, and there's more chemicals applied to lawn per area than agriculture. This is a ridiculous system that's got carried away. The first lawn ever documented was the Taj Mahal. And the concept was brought back to Europe by the Knights of the Crusades. That first lawn was maintained by 27 widows on their hands and knees with hand shears. The Knights of the Crusades put it round their manor houses and maintained it with sheep, which was reasonably sustainable. And they could see the beasts of the fields out in front of them, like the big lords of the manor landscapes that they wanted to portray. But now we're all wanting to be like lords of the manor. We're slaves to the lawn. It costs many dollars per square meter. It costs a lot of money to pretend to be the lord of the manor, and so many chemicals on the landscape, and so much energy, and so much water. This is a ridiculous and a stupid system to perpetuate unnecessarily. Turn the lawns into lunch. Turn the lawns into food. Cities that have excess unused lawns can feed themselves with the water runoff from the hardware directed to foodscapes. Urban foodscapes are the future of humanity. The sign here says it all. That's what we don't want. Evacuation assembly point. If we now look down, you'll see what lawns are actually good for, and the only thing a lot of lawns are good for: turning into good mulch. There are no lawns in nature. There are savannas, there are prairies, and there are meadows, and they're maintained by grazing animals. There are no high energy lawns like this. We might need some for sports fields and recreation and open space, but we've just got obsessed with this crazy system of maintained disorder through absolute tidiness that's just not a natural system. We've got to get over it. Well, here we are in the suburbs. It's just really a lawn mowing, time wasting, money gobbling, environmental and economical disaster. It's really quite disappointing. This is a nature strip system. It's called a green strip in America. It's only America, Canada, New Zealand and Australia that have nature strips. And if we actually converted the lawns that we don't use and the nature strips that we don't use in the city, we could feed a city with the same amount of energy that's poured into this money-wasting, time-consuming nightmare of a system. This over here, now this is something interesting. This is the front garden, and this is almost totally a foodscape. It's a water-wise garden, and this footpath is deep mulched on top of newspaper, so that nothing's going to grow in here. It's just a functional footpath access way, but it's perfectly on contour, so it harvests water and soaks it passively to the lower beds. So there's functional relationships, water harvesting relationships. It's definitely considered a water-wise foodscape. This is the type of design elements we have to include in all our designs so we get the best result, minimum input, maximum output. So we have a water tank here. This catches the roof water, so we've got clean rainwater, good drinking water if we want. Overflow from this goes to supply the garden as well, right to the top of the garden. Overflow from this tank goes to a little barrel that starts the process of water filtration through this very water-wise garden. Here's our water barrel nicely concealed in the hedge. This is fed from the water tank that catches water off the roof, and this is the overflow. It can be fed into the pond, it can be fed into the garden. Everything's supporting everything else. There's a lovely little frog pond here with a zola and a nice little branch in position, so it's frog friendly. Frogs can come in and out. Habitat, and there's food everywhere. Here's some nice hot chilies. There's some pak choy. There's scented pennyroyal there. There's a nice big beetroot here. In fact, there's a lot of beetroot through the garden. So we have contour layers designed into the garden so the water slowly soaks through. And we end up in this lower section. We've got a pond here, little pump reticulating water with solar power from the panels on the roof. And we can also connect up the roof water from the gutter on this side into the pond as part of the water supply. In the pond, we've got Chinese water chestnut, which is the most productive crop in the world by weight. And we have a Vietnamese mint, as well as other ornamental plants and our mulch azolla as well. Overflow from this pond carries on and feeds further on down the garden.
When we put the swales in, about a week after, we had a tremendous storm, and I was down the backyard and got caught in it, and down came the rain, and I turned around and the swales had filled, and I was just so excited. I went, look, they do work. And then the water just soaked into the swale. Just wonderful to see. once I got the earthworks in, measured where the contours were, and I've got swales in the backyard as well, the design just fell into place around it.
The back garden. Here we have an overflow from the grey water of the house, comes through a little sloping reed bed into an aerating pond right behind me. The overflow comes through the swale I'm sitting in and down almost the full length of the garden, soaks through the swale mound, and any overflow from that gets caught in the next swale further down. Here we have our top swale in the back garden. It overflows at this point here, comes down here and spreads into this swale. This swale stretches right around the raised garden pond and soaks all that water into the lowest part of the garden. And this beautiful feijoa hedge on the bottom of the garden, soaking the water into the lowest point as the final potential point of exit if it hasn't already been used already. Small space balcony garden, really micro space, a little bit of thermal mass, small garden bed, blueberry, apple, citrus, lemon verbena, and a nice variegated mint. Easy bit of gardening. There's an actual tea mint back up there. Easy bit of garden, easy to attend to, small space, works well. We can do this on a balcony, we can do this anywhere. Small space gardening, part of the evolution of the suburbs. Here's a reminder, a lesson from nature. We start off with a zinc aluminum gutter. We end up with a bit of leaf fall, compost, soil creation, and plants growing. We don't have to get complicated about this. We can make our soil as we garden. So here we've fully mulched the nature strip. We've taken it out of that silly system of lawn. Some people didn't like it, neighbours complained. The local government came and had a look, complimented the owner about being a water-wise nature strip. It's all got approved. Now we slip the fruit trees in. Game over. So does this look familiar? This is your dead standard, non-productive landscape of humanity. But there's hope. We can convert this into something that's worth achieving and something worth living in. High density human settlement. A challenge for permaculture? Small space? Wrong aspect? No, no challenge. We can come up to that challenge. Let's go and have a look at something that's been done really well. And this is something really worth paying attention to, because we have detail here. We have things that really work in small space, even when aspect and the actual area is something you would think limits the ability of design. The more restrictions, the more limitations you put on the design or a design site, the more creative you become. Opportunities just abound in small space intensity. All kinds of microclimates, all kinds of opportunities. This little space is just a wonderland of permaculture diversity. There's probably the highest density of plant stacking we've seen on any location. This is really urban permaculture in its most extreme expression. We have little ponds, flows of water. The space inside looks at the space outside directly, an infallible technique of making sure everything is attended to because you can see it from your personal inner space of the house. Vertical stacking on walls, trellises, little gardens, edges, pot plants, trees, climbers, herbs, medicinals. The whole thing stacked into very, very small area, very small space, extended micro edge, little pest and predator techniques involved everywhere. It's so tight, but so beautifully intricate and productive. There are so many lessons here. The whole system is a lesson. And we're even up against natural forest where we have eucalypts around us, allelopathic trees. It doesn't make any difference to this. There's little techniques for fencing to keep out wild birds and possums. There's native bush turkeys here that could potentially get in to the garden. I'll step over a little fence. There's all sorts of micro techniques that are working with the environment, pleasant little signs. Nothing succeeds like excess. All sorts of messages. Let us enjoy each day. Take time to be sage. Funny little sayings. There's a real enjoyment and a pleasure. There's a therapy in this system that's an added benefit to the physical event of gardening. And then you've of course got the productivity, you've got the health, you've got the 0 food miles, 0 food time, 0 food guilt. Therapy in relation to the action and interaction with the environment of growing food right next to the wild environment. Zone 5 is right on the doorstep of Zone Micro 1. This is something that we can learn from. Here is the productivity in the urban landscape that is only taking up 3% in volume area production compared to agriculture. 97% of agriculture is a waste of time, waste of space, waste of energy. This is the productive space, the micro space. Nothing beats the square meter production, energy efficiency of the urban micro space.
This aspect where you're looking now, this faces southwest, which is like the worst possible permaculture aspect. So what I have to do is utilise what I can. I've done a lot of vertical plantings. So I've got the pipe pot stand here, I've got hanging baskets, I've created trellises and I put vines over there, I've got arches, so everything's lifted up, and that helps get the sun, and it also helps with space as well.
The babako, often called a mountain pawpaw. It's very much like a bland pawpaw papaya to eat, but very nice as a sweetened fruit and a salad fruit, and it grows from a cutting, but occupies very little space on the ground because it's vertically productive. So great small space productive tree, and that's what we need in urban systems. We need to be able to prune trees so they take up very little ground space and produce higher. Tamarillo, the tree tomato. Again, this is something that's very productive in that it takes up small space on the ground, quite a tall vertical stem above my head, the fruit up in a small canopy above me. Great small space productive tree. Spiders, an element that will move in when you facilitate a niche, and they're working for us as a predator habitat, occupying space and controlling some of our pests. Here's a sneaky little corner. We've got our roof water tank, our first flush inverter, and here's our solar panel electricity, solar electric feedback to the grid inverter. So I have all kinds of energy capture, energy exchange systems right here, and a grey water filtration tank right next to that. So we've got a little practical area all squeezed into a corner here in an area that's least useful and most shady, functional elements in a good place. Great design choices. There goes the water pump. Right. So there's a little bit of water going on somewhere. Overflow from the tank runs down the pipe, and then we have this little journey of discovery into our drain here, through the drain, under the footpath, and then we discover out the other side into a slotted pipe here, underneath the mulch like a micro swale, running down through our garden. water-wise gardening, we don't need to use a lot of water, we just need to use a lot of common sense design. A lot of people don't understand roof water catchment into tanks. There are leaf litter diverters here, so leaves get diverted before they get to the tank, and even the tank itself still has a screen on it, so the water stays clean in the tank. And then first flush diverters just take the first water off the roof and divert it to a garden. There goes our water pump again, running on solar power. So this is as sustainable as you can get in a high density suburb, running in a conventional system where normal appliances are part of normal life, and gardens can be the subsidy back into a more sustainable life. Here we've got fruiting vines over a pergola, allowing summer shade and winter light penetration as they lose their deciduous leaves, framing the view. A beautiful way to use productive vertical space. I just love this little element. Everybody wants food self-sufficiency, some food self-reliance in these systems, but also request a little bit of sanctuary, a little bit of wilderness, a little bit of connection to the wild and nature. And we all like that, and we all deserve that. And here we've got this beautiful little natural water flow going into this little micro natural pond. Productive plants there, but a lovely little natural flow of water. And windows right there, you can sit and look at it from inside, or you can be working out here interacting with the garden, and any time you can just look over and feel like you're in the wild, feel like you're in nature. This is lovely therapeutic elements that make gardening all that bit more special. You're not just getting productive mulch and composty type gardening, you're getting this connection back to the patterns of nature and the wilderness. We're all part of it. It's central to everything that we do. Here we are in a bushland setting with an urban classic design, the herb spiral. A spiral planned in bed, raised in the middle, gradually spiraling down to a little pond at the bottom, dry plants at the top in the most well-drained position, slightly drier conditions on the way down, and plants planted in their appropriate spots that they like until we get right down to the plants that like damp conditions at the bottom. Small space, wrapping up the edge, really efficient, and it's made so that you can reach the middle without stepping on the garden from all sides. Classic permaculture design, the herb spiral. This is a really tight space. This is high density mulch and compost. Here's organic matter stored in milk crates. Here's a compost contained in one space. Here's a tumbler full of compost that we can aerate by tumbling. When we go on through, there's more storage of organic material down here below. Organic material in different forms, in different storages. A basket of mulch, some fresh mulch, a compost heap, nicely stacked, nicely covered. We're just tripping over organic matter storage everywhere. This is obviously high density organic gardening in production. A jasmine hedge. Beautiful hedges, functional, green, nice elements, but fedges are better. Here, we can cut off a hedge like this, and we can put in a fedge, a food hedge with productive plants that are not only functional, but also productive and nutritious in what they produce. Here we are, aquaponics. If you're interested in aquaponics, it doesn't have to be too fancy with the materials. Here's an aquaponic system with 2 baths and an IBC, an international bulk container, often called a tote, 1,000 litres. The nitrite cycle from the fish is nitrite from the fish manure. When it passes through the gravel and the plant roots and the algae on the gravel, it becomes nitrate, a natural fish fertilizer converted by the bacteria and organisms in the system. This is all natural process. A great, very productive, close link between plants and protein. This oxygenates the water and keeps the fish healthy and growing and happy. You're feeding the fish are feeding the plants. The oxygenation and the cleaning of the water with the gravel, algae and plant roots keeps the fish happy because the water's oxygenated. If you want to concentrate a lot of fish in a small space, you need oxygen. You've got to exchange the water and the water's got to be oxygenated. Then you can get a lot of fish in a small space. This way it's simple. We've got plants doing the job. This is a wonderful natural plant growing system, fertilized by fish. Aquaponics can take up all kinds of spaces and shapes. It can be recycled material, or it can be really fancy and disguised within garden ponds and look very, very aesthetic. It can come in lots of different forms. Very useful, small space system. And people understand they can get fresh food, protein and vegetables in the same area with the same system. Oh, look at this. What a beautiful scene. Who says permaculture can't be aesthetic and beautiful? Here we've got a koi pond, and these could be edible fish. You can eat carp, of course, the most eaten fish in the world. These just happen to be pretty carp. And we've got a pond that's cleaned with the biology of aquaponic vegetables. And the beautiful aesthetics of garden noise with the little water trickling through, food growing in all directions. You've got to feel happy and pleasant and relaxed and pretty secure with the amount of food I can see here. Let's have a look at this aquaponic filter vegetable system that's keeping our fish pond so beautiful and clean. Everything's in its place, doing its job. We've got productive plants in the aquaponic system, bit of aquaponic flow through, bit of basil, different celery, spinach, chives, all sorts of things. And we've got filter tanks at the back. This is really just a food production filter system for our pond. It doesn't have to all be super productive. There's only 2 people to feed. It's got a certain amount of therapy and ambience, which has a value in production because it's just a beautiful environment for people to be in. Here we have a lap pool that's full of silver perch, an aquatic system. And our filter system, there's 3 baths in a row full of gravel and aquatic plants. So the water just gets pumped up and then cycled through 3 baths back into the pond, which was a swimming pool and still is a swimming pool. You can still swim with the fish. And we've got a vegetable garden surrounding it. See if we can get some fish to come up to feed. Oh yeah, here they are. As a fisherman, it makes you feel really secure looking at something like this. You know those fish are growing fast. You know they're efficient at gaining weight. And it's so easy to get them out, they're there.
The whole idea is to build a system that it's productive, because aquaculture is the most productive system there is, because what you grow in an aquaculture system doesn't have to stand up and hold its weight against gravity. So we haven't fed the fish at all that are in the pool, and they're growing like topsy.
They're eating algae, roots of the plants, and insect larvae that come in there. There's not a mozzie larvae to be seen anymore. Les has always been the Geiger counter. If there's mosquitoes or fleas, Les gets bitten.
And I'm not getting bitten.
Chinese water chestnut, an aquatic plant, and the plant that produces more food by weight than any other plant, the most productive plant by weight in the world, and it's so abundant. Inside a pot, inside the swimming pool, with the silver perch, growing a beautiful root crop. Chinese water chestnut, a great addition to a system like this. That's algae, and most people with swimming pools fight against algae. They put chemicals in to stop algae. We're actually encouraging algae. Algae is one of the basic chains of life. It is the starting block of the building of life in a pond. You go from algae, which is just made with organic matter and sunlight, to zooplankton, which are the tiny microorganisms like the soil organisms, but they're aquatic, they're in the pool, in the mud. They create the soil in the shallow lakes and ponds, one of the fastest soil creating mechanisms in the world, underwater, builds more soil than forests. And then on from there to crustaceans and fish. We can introduce those little crustaceans, but starting with algae, we've got fish here that are algae eaters. They're booming on algae, and algae is full of omega-3, which actually builds their bodies rich in omega-3, a health-giving food for us. So a conversion from a problem to a solution to a beneficial food. This is too easy. This happens almost automatically. You have to facilitate these creative situations for a productive end result. We can do this, not a problem. Straight conversion, swimming pools to food. Well, what a scene. Here we are. I've got a beautiful lemon in front of me. I've got aquatic plants in the pond, fish in the pond, vegetables behind, a persimmon tree up over my shoulder. It's all happening. And what's interesting that is happening that we don't notice and often don't realise is at the bottom of the pond, at the bottom of the old swimming pool, we've got soil creation, and that is a byproduct of this whole event. And every now and again we can take out the really high quality soil at the bottom of the pond, which is anaerobic, has no air in it, bring it up, put it through the compost and convert it to fertiliser. So there's all these exchanges and cycles and events that we can take advantage of and harvest the byproduct of really healthy food. Fantastic. Yeah, a hook and a line and I'd have a meal out of there in no time. And it wouldn't be long before we just gain more and more and more food out of a system like this. Not only growing fish, but it's also growing vegetables on the side here. We've got vegetable gardens, chickens, we've got fruit trees. We're overlooking the whole system from the house. And you can still swim in it. Why would you have a poisonous system? Why would you have chlorine? Why wouldn't you have it cleaned up by biology? Why don't you swim with nature, live with nature, and let nature produce a surplus that gives you your sustenance? Real life. Small animals in urban permaculture systems, they have specifics, they're quiet animals. Worm farms are actually a stock animal. Fish, pigeons, rabbits, quail, chickens, ducks, all of these can be designed in. They're wonderfully productive and they have great nutrient flow potential. We can design these so they are of a great nutrient and productive benefit to our system. Here's our little friend, the quail. What a beautiful small bird. Just about the wild natural element, domesticated well enough that they're easy to feed, produce really good fertilizer in their manure. Excellent small element, provides us with plenty of nutrient rich, nutrient dense food. Take a very small space You only need a small cage, something about the size of a small rabbit hutch or a small cage. So no area taken up, and a beautiful little element to be included in the garden. Early morning quail eggs in a permaculture garden in Sydney. And beautiful early morning breakfast meal that is. And here's a tip for you. They happen to be in the top 10 of the world's aphrodisiacs. That's a pretty good reason to include them, eh? This is the ultimate soundproofing rooster noise prevention system, designed by Penny Pyatt of Permaculture North Sydney.
This chicken house is quite unique because it is made of straw bales turned on their side, and it is designed to meet the needs of the chicken. Chickens like to get up high at night, they like to roost. So inside this chicken house, it's quite high, as you can see, and there is a very high perch up the top that they can roost on and get out of the way of foxes. So it's perfect for the chicken, they're quite happy. The other unique thing about this house is because it's straw bale, it is really well insulated. So it's cool in summer, it's warm in winter, and more importantly, it muffles the noise of crowing roosters, which is a huge issue. So here we are right in the middle of a densely populated suburban area, and we could have roosters in here that would crow early hours of the morning, late at night, and wouldn't disturb anybody because nobody can hear them. Okay, test pilot rooster entering the cockpit.
No, Penny.
And I'm going to close him in.
No, you want me to crow? I'm Jeff Lawton, and some people say I'm a permaculture rooster. Zola, a floating water fern that harvests nitrogen on its roots and bonds it into its body, making it an ideal small space fertilizer. Produced in a small area, it doesn't get out of control yet produces quickly. Very, very high quality as an addition to your garden. Can be used as a food for fish and other living elements. There's about 16 different types throughout the subtropics and tropics of the world. A great addition, another inoculum to the soil that gives us the most productive garden space. The most productive land on this planet are the small square meterage gardens of urban permaculture. Here we have an urban greywater reed bed. I'm standing in a reed bed that has 3 levels. Pipe comes in just here from the greywater exit of the house. It goes through a surge tank underneath the back veranda, which is simply a bathtub. Comes through into here, through a set of reeds that are growing in a gravel bed that drops in 3 stages through here, and then into this beautiful pond that's actually got lemna and salvinia as mulch for the garden and food for the domestic ducks. It overflows through this point when we get a large supply of water, goes on down a lovely little rock channel into a hidden frog pond in there, more predator habitat. Now these reeds are really prolific and they can be cut regularly and used as an urban mulch supply. So you've got a cleaning system, a habitat, an organic matter production system. You've got beautiful little flowing features and everything's in surplus. What a great design feature. This is the sort of thing anybody can install. It's been running for about 8 years. No problems at all. No problems at all. Here we have biology cleaning up the wastes of humanity into products that produce food for humanity. Closing the link. Permaculture design. I can hear the frogs in the pond. Our urban pesticide elements. There they go, croaking away, even in the middle of the day. They're working hard for us, balancing out the pest problems. And it's a simple design inclusion to include a few small water features with fish to control mosquitoes, habitat for frogs that control pests. We've also got little rockeries all around us that are really good lizard habitat. So the frogs are working at night, or usually at night, and when it's raining, and the lizards are working when it's warm and sunny, and they're coming out of the rockeries, controlling our pest problems. We've also got bird perches absolutely everywhere, especially in a canopy garden like this, which is covered in deciduous fruit trees. They're about to lose their leaves because we're coming into the Australian autumn here in Sydney. So bird perches, rockeries for lizards, and little ponds for fish and frogs. We're getting that balance so that we have not many pest problems at all, and most of the pests are quite confused by the complexity of the system, and a confused pest is easily predated on by our favoured predator habitat. This is all part of design. Almost everything in this garden is recycled out of unwanted surplus in the city. It's freely available material that's been reassembled here as useful elements in our system. So it's back into productive use, providing a sustainable habitat example of humanity. Wonderful design, wonderful stuff. These are meat rabbits, and they're quiet, they're very productive. As we know, rabbits breed easy. They're great quality meat, and they're easy to keep in the suburbs like this. A suspended cage allows the manure to drop through, and if you combine it with ducks, like there is in this situation, the ducks actually do eat some of the rabbit manure. You get a mixed manure, great fertilizer, great production, great links, a wonderful system. Any of us can do this, it's easy. Rabbits eat weeds, so you can weed your garden, feed your rabbits, get good production, even feed your ducks with a bit of their excrement. There's no barrier to age in permaculture. Rosina is a retired urban gardener, and she just loves permaculture.
Let me show you my tank garden. It's exciting. All you have to do is think it's a great big compost bin. That's all you've got to do. And so you just set it up as if you were making a compost. So you put in all your rough stuff, like all these palm fronds that you see around me down the bottom. Anything big that you want to get rid of, any bits of wood and stuff, put that all down the bottom, put a layer about that thick in there like that. And then I put a layer of really rough stuff that's lying around, leafy stuff, carbon stuff, maybe a bit of another green layer on top of that, all rough stuff, it doesn't matter. And just keep layering it as if you're making a compost bin. And it doesn't have to be anything fine until you get right up to the top, to that area there, about there, where you want to plant. And then you can put your nice fine compost from your compost bin in there, and maybe some mushroom compost if you feel like it. And then you know what I do about my mulch. I soak my mulch in molasses and kelp. And in that wheelbarrow I put a cup of molasses and a cup of kelp into the wheelbarrow with some water, and then I break up the straw and put it in there and let it soak for a while, and I mulch the whole of the top of that with about that much mulch, wet mulch.
Rosina has taken a classic victory garden, a garden that was promoted in the Second World War in England, with chickens and garden interacting over 6 months. So the chickens fertilise the soil, and then you garden behind them, and they clean up the garden that's now out of production.
So this is my design, and it works really well. It's a 2-pen system, and at the moment the chooks are living in this area here. It's the winter time, and I just lift up this little tent peg here, and I open this up, and I've got 2 pen pegs, and they just climb through there and get in. I don't have to even touch them or disturb them at all. And they'll stay here for 2 or 3 months while the garden grows. I will feed them from that garden and myself, and then when it's finished, I'll just open up that little corner that I showed you, and they'll just go through there and demolish the whole lot for me in about two or 3 days. It's all flat.
Ducks in the city. Another great element that can be included: meat, eggs, but also manured water that can easily be soaked into your garden through miniature swales to fertigate fruit trees. This is a great system because of the fact that the manure is liquid in the water and is transported for free through your miniature water harvesting systems. Here we're looking at a small micro duck fertigated swale. Duck manure and water flows from the duck pen pond through here and fertilizes and waters our fruit trees free of charge. All works with the ducks doing what they like to do, manuring in their pond water. And they're such beautiful animals to have around. Here we are in a food forest canopy section of the garden. In summer this is beautiful shade. In spring it's a plethora of flowers overhead, and all through the year there's different fruits available. It's Mediterranean, so we have all sorts: citrus, pear, plums, apple, figs, apricots, macadamia even. We have guavas, there's grapes, and even avocados. Mulberries over the chicken pen. There's a real diversity of fruit trees here, and microclimate created to take it towards the temperate in some places on one edge and towards the subtropics on another. The Mediterranean, a great area to garden a mixture of fruit, to have canopy shade in summer, and as the autumn comes in like now, you get a drop of leaves and the winter sun's released into the garden and warm it back up. Wonderful system to live in and feel comfortable and have a good healthy supply of diverse high quality fruit trees and product. Roof water collection into a tall water tank, good quality rainwater, captured almost at the height of the roof gutter itself. So a real tall stack tank, picking up maximum amount of water, taking up minimum space. Really good element to include. More or less drought proofs this garden. Permaculture school gardens are such a valuable asset to not only the children, but the suburb itself. Every lesson that can be learned in the classroom can be learned outside in the garden classroom, and then it's extended out home to the family and out through the suburbs. While we're here in a beautiful schoolyard garden, the type of schoolyard that every school should have, but this is Karonga School for children that are disadvantaged. But this school has an advantage because it has this beautiful permaculture system that's not that old, 1 to 2 years, and they've got all kinds of things going on. Fresh vegetables being produced by the children, fruit, a spally of fruit trees, a small food forest up above us on a terrace. We've got a kitchen right next door. They can walk straight out of the kitchen, pick food, go in and process it, and they just love this activity. They're eating vegetables that they don't normally eat at home. The teachers have even had to video the children eating vegetables that their parents wouldn't believe they'd eat. That's because they're interacting with the environment. They love the mulch, they love the worm farms, they love the interaction with little bits of wildlife. There's lizards living in amongst this garden, blue-tongued lizard as a resident. This is the type of thing that really helps children learn real sustainable action on the ground. This little bit of water leaching out of the crack in the the brick raised garden. It proves that this garden's built on concrete with a little bit of soil, organic matter and compost. This garden's quite fertile, it's producing really well. You don't have to start off with soil. You can garden straight on concrete. There's plenty of it around. All we need to do is get into it. This garden's made up of recycled house bricks, 5 bricks high, quite stable. They don't need to be cemented into position because 5 bricks gives you a stability as long as you're crossed up on the courses there. The children have designed this pattern garden so there's easy access and even the smallest child can reach into the middle. So from either side the garden's easily accessed and you can reach in there, no compaction, really good fertile soil in here. Plenty of worms, even on concrete there's enough bacteria here to keep this earthworm nice and healthy because bacteria is his main food. There we go, I'll just tuck him back in. He can continue extending the fertility for the kids in their garden. Here we are, an urban garden just 2 years old, just over 2 years, and all of this production, all of this potential, more than enough food for 1, 2 or even 3 people. And now the owner's moving into chickens, the free range chickens through their urban food forest. The swales are working fine. A perfect casual example of how we can produce our own needs in the suburbs with very little effort, just good design as the process. It's hard to imagine the guilds that are potentially beneficial to each other. There are so many combinations of plants here. There are scented plants like the lavender behind me. Here's a fruiting fig. There's tansy here underneath the fig. And right next to it's rhubarb, backed up by a ground cover of nasturtium, which is a good edible leaf tonic. There's food everywhere, but there's combinations of plants that seem to be working well together. There are so many potential combinations, we've yet to discover all the possibilities. Here we are, right at the top of the block, next to a mango and a busy road in Sydney. We've got pumpkin ground cover on the floor and quite a few pumpkins here. They're fruiting quite well. Now I step through these pumpkins. Something I'd like to point out here is we've got a water tank. And again, it's at the top of the block. So we've got free gravity water going downhill across the block of land, across the garden. It's up this high because that's just high enough that it can be fed from the roof to get maximum gravity fall from the water tank. Important design element. The overflow from the water tank comes down here under this little cross pipe into the first urban swale of the system. And now we've got a matrix of food forest species, smelly geraniums, distracting pests, lavender, smelly and distracting pests, remnant ornamentals from the previous garden design. Our citrus are here, pepper tree, feijoa. We've got compost bins, overflow of the swale, garden pond, another garden pond. So we've got predator habitat, more pumpkins and another urban garden swale. A lovely weeping mulberry, the Chatoot mulberry. Stepping over more pumpkins again. It's pumpkin time of year. Past the bridge on the swale. More compost bins. A pecan tree. And on we go through finer and finer gardens. We've got figs and we have an espalier apricot against the western wall of the house. The apricot does like a dry condition. It gets a cool enough winter here, but the thermal mass of the brick wall gives it the dry condition that imitates a slightly more arid climate. Good positioning for an apricot, good tree to espalier against the wall. Permablitz. This is the name we give to a lesson in action. All we need is a client who has a garden who wants to transform it into productivity by permaculture design, and some students who don't mind getting involved in a bit of practical work. So what we do is we put these elements together. The people who want to learn, the people who need a job done, and this becomes a practical lesson. Design is the initial element after observation, and then when we have agreement on design, we move in and we actually do the job with multiple hands working together, tools provided, materials provided, and very quickly we have an end result that is a really good, positive lesson and a fantastic thing to leave behind for your client. We all coming in?
Thanks for coming. Hello. Jeff, come and have a look at the garden. I've lived here for about 30 years, and there was already an established garden when I came here. You can see there are huge trees, but there are also big trees that I've planted myself. While it's very beautiful and we get plenty of birds, I'd really like to be producing more food.
You don't mind pruning this back a bit?
Not a bit.
So if we were to bring in a mulcher, one advantage of having old growth trees that are not productive that you don't mind pruning is we probably could get most of the mulch we need here, and it's a kind of diverse mix that's probably better than anything we could buy. What's your general theme here?
I want to have an orchard of fruit trees. I'd like around the chook pen to have some productive vines, maybe grapes. I'd like some lychees. I'd love to have a little stand of bananas. You know, I'm ready to let go of a lot of the old stuff in the garden in the interest of making it more productive and having some new stuff.
Okay, let's draw out a bit of a concept of the garden. So to outline the garden itself, more or less we've got a long rectangle, and it's facing north, which is the sun. Pretty close to facing north. The house fits in the block about here. Set of stairs where we're sitting now, and we have a footpath coming straight into the house. We have a driveway which is 2 concrete strips. Right at the back we have a chicken pen with a chicken house centrally located. Then we have numerous little garden beds coming round, all planted up to different things. So little spaces at the back, little set of stairs. There's 3 quite nicely positioned little ponds, and then retaining walls and little bits of infrastructure that all make it kind of nice and interesting and higgledy-piggledy. Then over here on the east to northeast side, there's this really nice herb garden potential. It's been used as a herb garden before, but we've got to use some sort of hard infrastructure to make it a safe footpath, and a retaining wall to keep it off the house. And that's viewed directly from the kitchen window and the study window. A great view straight into a nicely compact little productive garden of herbs and spices and flavouring type of herbs and perennials that are easy to maintain, easy to view straight out the window. And it is possible, and it would gain quite a bit of aesthetics, to put in a herb spiral rock garden there that will have a diversity of herbs growing really close, look good too, and a fence that can be grown on. Then there's a footpath that comes down to the front garden where we are here. Now there's numerous plantings of ornamental plants, and Jenny doesn't mind if we prune them and change that system. There's a bit of a garden bed next to the steps here, and then down the side there is one productive tree just there. It's a feijoa. It's not really fruiting well, but we can boost that up. Then there's a buffer on the front gate, front fence, and there's quite a busy road we can hear just next to us. There's plantings around the driveway and around the house, and there's a kind of yin-yang sort of spiral garden in here. Now we can change this. The slope comes slightly from the highest point here to the lowest point there on that garden. We can change this to a contour garden footpath, double reach bed garden. It'll curve across slope like this. They're interesting patterns. There'll be a single reach garden around the outside. And double reach garden through the middle. So here's our double reach garden beds here. You can reach to the middle from either side, and they're on contour. They're harvesting water, so this is contour from this end to this end of each footpath. Now there is a water flow issue, Jenny tells us, coming under the house that often washes out the front footpath. We can direct that water and pacify it on these contour footpaths and drop it out of multiple exits onto the street. It'll benefit our screen planning, and it'll really take a lot of energy out of that water. Now we have another narrow garden bed here, and we can quite easily put little keyholes into this. Keyhole gardens coming in off the side of the footpath, and we can garden in here a whole mixture of picking greens and regularly attended crops that can be picked all the time by simply walking down the footpath and regularly picked next to the footpath here, and then larger growing beds across our front lawn. That's our main annual production area. Keep the access open through from the driveway. We've got a screen plant in here and some palms that could be taken out. Now those palms here could be transplanted because they're easily accessed from the driveway. So these could be extracted and possibly even sold on to landscapers as mature palm transplants. We can design in a buffer screening here of the house next door with ornamental flowering plants and some productive plants like rose apple is a fruit tree that works as a good screen and also has a very aromatic, nice flowering fruit, flower and fruit. Feijoas will also work along here. There's a crepe myrtle already in position and a malviscus. All of those can be pruned as an integrated hedge, food hedge, fedge. So this could be a screen, fedge. Beneficial to screen the neighbours, but also nice for the neighbours to look at. There's multiple tank positions just in the back garden. There could be a tank here or here. There would be possibly positions down near the front here where we could take out this garden position here and put another tank in. There might be possibilities of a fourth tank over here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 positions. You might find another position over here for a tank. So we might be able to share the tankage of the water around the house, because the runoff from the gutters goes in different directions, and there's quite good guttering and leaf screening on the gutters already. So I think it's a better option to find tank positions in each corner and put smaller tanks in rather than one large one with lots and lots of downpipes. So annual garden here. With fast production crops. Very visual. You're coming into the house, you can see it easily. The house looks down on it, it's got good sun, it's good open space. Up the back here, we've got chickens, and they're very well positioned because nutrients flow in this way. We could share their space with one position here and a second position here, and put a winter crop, summer crop of main crop vegetables in there, like corn in summer, corn, beans and squash, corn, beans and pumpkin in summer, and potatoes in winter, and switch the chickens to clean up the garden crop and then clean up the garden after the crop. So they do a sort of dig for victory type garden, which was promoted in the Second World War in England, the simple 2-garden chicken tractor system. There are old posters of that sort of thing. Now, when you come out of there, you get this beautiful old growth ornamental garden system. A lot of pruning can be done and chipped into mulch. We've got quite high quality mulch production. There's citrus trees in position. We can increase the diversity of fruit trees through here. We can use really nice functional ground covers, understory bushes. Are you a coffee drinker?
Yes.
You are? Okay, well you only need 11 good coffee bushes to produce enough coffee for one person. And you'd easily get 30 or 40 as understory in here. So once you've got your fruit trees up, we could take up a bit of space with understory coffee. 5 corner fruit, the carambola, grows as an understory. Any of the trees that love sun and a slightly drier environment, like figs or pomegranates or guavas or citrus, need to be a little bit closer to the open space of infrastructure where there's concrete. So shade loving, larger trees to the back. Trees that like full sun and a slightly drier environment to the front towards the house, where the concrete and the infrastructure hardware will help the soil dry out. And then around the space, there's a requirement for scents and flowers, and they can take up that sunny position right around the concrete infrastructure. So we're really coming down in layers, arcs of solar aspect. There's always going to be reasonable sun coming over the house. So in this lower area where there is quite a lot of concrete and there's quite a lot of old steps and there's cracks in the infrastructure, we can actually get pennyroyal as a ground cover scented herb. We can get self-heal. We can get pinto peanut. We can get mucuna wenna, which is a longevity health brain food herb. They all grow as little ground covers in amongst cracks where there's lots of little captured nutrient. And we can take up the space that annoying weedy type species are occupying at the moment. Instead of pulling the weeds and leaving a vacancy, leaving a niche that something's bound to move into, we're going to pull them out and put something in. So we'll have a completely occupied space. And by the time we get through there, we got a little special herb garden. We got our water tanks for water self-sufficiency in drought times, and of course good roof water to drink if we want. Annual garden at the front. We've got a pretty low maintenance, high productivity, sustainable urban habitat of humanity. That's what we're after. That's what we want to do. That's what we can do for people. And we can make sure anybody can do it, and they can feel really confident that anybody can do this after a little bit of design, a little bit of enthusiasm, a little bit of passion, and we can all get into a comfortable suburban landscape. Here we are, day one on the Perma Landscape job. We're working here with a set of student interns, and we've gone through and explained the garden as what we are taking out and what we're changing from ornamental to productive and functional. And that's what we've started first. And we're assembling materials that we're going to use at the front of the house. And we're also taking the prunings out to a chipping machine that's going to convert it straight to mulch, and it will be coming back as fertilizer. And we're going to sequester the carbon of the ornamental plants and trees as good soil food for new soil biology stimuli. So that'll go into production, that'll go into product, that'll actually create this beautiful harmonious garden. When you go into design, you have to observe really carefully what's around you and listen. Listen really carefully to the client and ask questions, and then take extra observations of what then needs redesigning. So you don't go into a design with a fixed impression of you're going to implement this style of garden or that style of garden. First off, main frame concepts. We need the right amount of light, we need the right sort of aspect, we need to take advantages of shade and buffer winds or open up to winds. All these things are important for design in different landscapes and climates. Then, as you get the main frame accepted as common sense, then you start to redefine the fine increments of design. The detail starts to come out. Once you've designed the main frame skeleton, you flesh out the design with the beautiful small details, and they potentially become the artistic expression that your client requires. What we're noticing here is an evolution of the ground base. The forms of the ground are coming out. So it was this big once, and it got taken over by the rampancy of ornamental plants.
Yeah.
And now we can design in a whole new system using the original patterns and forms of the landscape. It's a beautiful terrace you got there.
It is a lovely terrace, yeah. I remember it from when it was bare before.
Well, right now we're at a stage where we're bringing in new materials and bulk product like heavy mulches. We're moving rock walls and stone edges around, and we're also placing plants into position. And you have to be careful here because you've got living elements that you want to go through as permanent parts of the garden, and big bulky material moving in to become the organic cycles in the system. So we're going to be coming through citrus trees, sort of line of citrus trees at this contour. Some of them are overstory, some of them are understory. And the understory ones are sacrificial. They'll only be here for a few years and they'll cycle through. The overstory ones can be chopped out later, but some may be permanent, like big canopy trees that'll sort of cycle nutrient in the end. Okay, here we're planning a hedge, kind of a food hedge, what you might call a fedge. It's got feijoas and Brazil cherries, two hardy species that can easily be turned into a hedge. We've got one or two acacias, nitrogen fixing trees, that will support it into establishment, give it nitrogen, give it some shelter, and create the mass in the early days. Then the fruit trees and the hedge type species fruit trees will take over and form a green barrier, separating this garden from the neighbours and giving the neighbours something nice to look at from behind, a food producing hedge. Here we are outside the chicken pen at the top of the garden, and we've got a water nutrient flow coming through here. Chicken manure in solution running through the garden. Kind of haphazard, and when it rains it's probably a flood of nutrient. What we can do here is just make a connection between elements, and we can put our prunings in over the fence. All the high carbon prunings can go in to entertain the chickens. They'll feed on the seeds and the bugs and the weed elements, and they'll convert them into fertilizer. They'll stack the carbon for us, they'll compost for us, and the nutrient will be a lot more pacified like that. But we can take it a stage further. We can get this high nitrified nutrient turn it sideways and passively soak it into the fruit tree systems in the food forest at the top with a block of land. Now, here we have a roof without a gutter. We can put a gutter on there, catch that water and choose where we direct it. It can go through a tank, then the overflow from the tank can be designed to intercept with a pacifying water soak. So we know where the nutrients going, we know where the water's going. We are making the choices of way the energy and life enhancing components start their slow net and pan soak through the block of land. Our chickens here are using this pot plant as their dust bath because there's just no dry ground in here and everything's compacted, and they've scratched the soil away from the surface of these roots, which isn't doing these trees any favours. Actually got anaerobic ground here full of nutrient. They need a dust bath. If they don't have a dust bath or a sulphur bath of some type, in these damp conditions, these birds could easily get chicken mites, and that's a really itchy problem if you're getting around those chickens. And they don't like it either. So dust bath in the shed or somewhere in the dry will do them a lot of favours. And we need to put a deep litter mulch yard here. We need to bring in organic matter and put in a lot of straw yard type system, something with organic matter. Now this is the subtropics, there's plenty of pruning material can come in here. They're gonna love it, we're gonna love it, the ground's gonna like it, everything's gonna go better when we supply with them with the organic matter they'd like to have here. Here we are, second day, and we're digging out our contour garden beds. Double reach, you can reach from one side or the other. Wheelchair footpaths on contour, giving us a really easy garden for productivity because it will hold the water, soak the water, or run the water off. It's our choice because we're on contour.
Well, I think yesterday was the scary day because it was the deconstruct, and today is the construction day, and it's really exciting. It's a dream. It's a dream come true.
Well, we're putting the final touches to the vegetable garden, the papering and the mulching. And this is where landscaping becomes kind of permascaping, because this is a little bit unconventional. We're using recycled newspapers. We're putting them on nice and thick, and we're layering under the footpath, then mulching the footpath with wood chip, and then laying them over the beds and putting the straw on the top for our growing media, what we're going to plant our vegetables in. Now, if you're not fussy about this, if you don't take up all the gap, make sure there's overlaps. Our golden rule here is, in this moist climate, is Sunday edition newspapers, front to back cover, overlapped, minimum thickness. 1.3 square metres for one bale of straw for solid mulch. If you're designing for a client or a customer who doesn't really have the permaculture enthusiasm yet, but wants it and wants production, you've got to cover nice and thick. Make sure you're secure from weeds and you have good growth for your vegetables. So 1.3 square metres and one bale of straw divided across that is a thick mulch. Sunday edition, front to back newspapers, really thick. You cannot make it too thick. Now this is crucial in an arid climate. If you put newspaper and mulch down too thin in an arid climate, it actually sucks moisture out of the soil instead of holding moisture to the soil. Arid climate should be thicker still. It's a minimum thickness that you must add a good depth of newspaper and mulch, and this is a humid climate. Arid climate, even thicker. So then you can really make it weed free. You can really hold moisture. This is permascaping now, and it doesn't actually relate so much to your landscape job. Right, so you want that to stick, and we really need the hose here to stick that down. We should have this wet so it's sort of sticking. It's better if we wet the newspaper so it's soppy and slop it down because it sits tight on the bed. If we do it dry like this and the wind comes up, we've got a real problem. It can look real messy. But we can wet it as we go. It'll take a lot of moisture. It's an awful lot of moisture to get it initially wet, and it stays wet for a real long time. Down to the newspaper. A couple of big handfuls of compost in there.
Do you go through the newspaper or not?
No, not unless I'm growing a deep-rooted crop like carrots. And then I only spike the newspaper. There's so much sheep mulch, there's so much compost underneath. These plants are in a very, very spoilt condition. You can't do this in the broadacre, but you can do it in an urban garden because you've got all the mulch and recyclable materials to cover the garden with. And it's 100% success. This will be a really, really productive garden. Plants will grow fine. Well, here we are about 4 months later. The winter's going through. We're still in winter. We've got crops, we've got some food to eat, and we've definitely got some good soil creation here with all this mulch. These garden beds are on contour, so the footpaths are acting like little swales and catching the water and soaking it in. We've definitely improved the water cycles in the garden, and I think it's going to improve as we go. As we get towards the summer, growth will really speed up.
Instead of the water in a heavy rain sluicing out of the garden and taking all the topsoil away, the design that was brought into the garden has meant that we're holding water within the places where we really need it, in the vegetable beds, rather than having it all sluice away. And it's nourishing the vegetable beds and helping all of this strong, thick stuff break down more quickly.
Well, our dressed up little herb garden's coming along. Our footpath's working well. And now we can see herbs quite clearly out of the kitchen window and out of the study window here. And it's going to be just a nice scented medicinal and culinary herb garden, a great addition to the health for the people in the house. So we're coming into spring growth, and summertime this will be quite a lush garden. A lot of prune trees are shooting back. They're small coppice growths now, and if we choose the leaders that we want and cut the rest off, they'll come back to quite a long leggy tree, or we can cut them down as bushes. We can choose the amount of shade we want. We can manipulate the garden as mulch producing, shade producing, however we want it to go. We've got control of this garden now, and we can lean it towards productivity, good permaculture design, by pruning and manipulating our regrowth of ornamental plants and trees. This is compost creation on an industrial scale. At this wonderful refuse dump, this garbage tip in Sydney, Australia, 70 to 80% by weight goes back over the weighbridge out of here as recycled material to be reused as valuable products in the community. Now that's what we're talking about, and that's going to be increased. The target's going up on that, so we're going to do better than that. This is what we need to get the food production up in the city. Here we have, at the refuse dump, a demonstration site of all kinds of principles of urban gardening. We have little boats full of food and a frog pond for habitat. We've got food plants everywhere. We've got our banana circle here with a worm farm in the middle producing all kinds of food. So we've got principles about worm farms and food production with bananas and mulch pits. There's different ground covers, scented herbs for teas, lemon, verbena, ground covers, parsleys. We've got a classroom specifically for composting. So we've got seats arranged so we can teach composting and have all the demonstrations in front of the kids or whoever's here. We're underneath a mulberry and a loquat, and we've got an outdoor classroom and demonstrations of all kinds of things like mulching with signage, recycled material used as edging. We've got a bay laurel here and all different types of herbs. We've got different demonstrations and signs about diversity being stability, and now that recycling And reusing and reducing waste is such an important part of everyday life in the city. Different things are demonstrated all around us, so people can take these lessons home and they can use them in their own gardens. Children learn really well by seeing these sort of demonstrations and then going home and actually teaching their parents what it is they can do to be more sustainable. It's just a lovely set of demonstrations in a place that you wouldn't imagine you'd have lots of demonstrations, at a refuse dump. This is the sort of thing we need council and government support so that we can actually have people learning around the systems where we should be turning a problem into a solution and changing our behaviour so we don't cause so many problems. This is sensible design in demonstration as an education centre. We'll support this every time in the permaculture movement. These are permaculture people working within the system to change the system. It's all about positive change. Now here's something you wouldn't see in the average backyard. Well, not very often. This is a rocket stove water heater with a very small amount of wood. It can just be stick fuel from a coppice tree that regrows sticks all the time. You don't have to kill any trees. A very small amount of wood, about 1/5 that would be normally used to heat hot water, in this rocket stove, vented down with a long chimney. All the wood gases are burnt off, so very little smoke, if any at all, comes out the chimney. 18 metres of copper pipe, coiled through a 44-gallon drum, about 200 litres of water. That's the thermal mass. The stove is vented past the thermal mass of water, heats up the copper pipe in the middle, which has got the water running through it for your hot water, for your sinks, for your showers. Very small amount of wood, no smoke, no pollution, can fit in anywhere. You can use this for cooking or heating your hot water, or even a thermal mass bed like in China. Traditional kangs will use rocket stove technology, heating underneath a thermal mass, a stone or ceramic bed base. Old technology, works good anytime, no obsolescence in this system. Well, this is a nice scene. We're here at a community garden, a complete diversity of vegetables, fruits and vines all around us. And there's all kinds of little interesting objects as well. Dressing the place up, making an interesting community space where people learn gardening. They can rent a little plot here and then take their experiences home and extend it out through their own garden. This is a great system. There's all kinds of raised beds being demonstrated here and in production, because it's an area that gets a little bit wet sometimes. A lot of community garden spaces are given to the community when all the urban space is taken up, and often areas that flood aren't used, so they're given over to the community for gardening. So often raised beds, but a great space, an enjoyable space to be in. There's a lot of community action here, a lot of learning, a lot of socialising, and a lot of really good food. Nasturtium. It's a good tonic. A healthy thing to eat a nasturtium leaf and a flower every day. A little bit peppery, not too unpleasant at all, lovely. A great addition to a salad. A good tonic to just browse on in the garden. And a beautiful looking flower. Here's a nice little legume that a lot of people have heard about. This is alfalfa, sometimes called lucerne. It's a perennial, it keeps growing, and here you can see it's being cut. That's because it's a good mulch plant. It's fixing nitrogen in the soil, it's got nitrogen in the body of the plant, it's not really big, fits in the garden and can be a green manure fertiliser that's continuously added to the garden. Free fertiliser growing where we garden. Another great system. Here's a little volunteer plant, something that could be called a weed. But this is an edible weed and a very beneficial one, a medicinal plant. This is Gotu Kola. It's full of minerals and it's a great brain food. So, a little bit of Gotu Kola every now and again. Fresh, out of your garden. It's a passive little ground cover. Works fine as a great free interactive. This little herb, Herb Robert, Geranium robertinum. Well, an insignificant looking little plant, but this is one of the plants that has a very special quality. It oxygenates the cells of the body and raises the potential of any herbal remedies that you are taking. Very few herbs do this, oxygenate the cells of the body. A great herb. Grows just like a weed in your garden. Here we have a raised garden made out of roofing iron, and these can operate in two ways. This can be an open bed to the ground as a raised tank garden, easy access, but it can also be a sealed tank with a water tank at the bottom. So the bottom of the garden is full of water with a screen in between the water and the soil, and that becomes a wicking bed. And that's an incredibly water efficient garden because very little water is used. It comes up with condensation up through the soil and can be recycled within the garden itself. A great little system for saving water, essential for dry climates. Here's a worm tower, and it's a vertical worm farm. Just a big pipe going down into the garden, holes in the side, open to the bottom. The worms only live in organic matter, so they won't go into the soil. These are compost worms, not earthworms. But the byproduct is, these have great fertilizing qualities for the garden and create a compost and a worm juice that gives us free fertilizer. Fantastic convenience for a home garden or an urban garden. And here it's a community garden demonstration. With these compost worm towers, the miniature vertical worm farm is in the garden. They don't leave there, they don't go through the soil. They're being well fed, they stay right there where there's high quality organic matter. And here, the juices and the compost fertilize the garden in situation. You don't have to separate your worm farm from your garden. Great design. Here's a variety of worm farms. A stacking worm farm with a liquid drain at the bottom where they climb up. And here is a normal bath set up as a larger worm farm. They all work fine. Just depends what scale of worm farm you want to set up. Now this is the sort of material that feeds them. Just general vegetable and fruit scraps out of the kitchen. Now here's a layered worm farm. And we've got quite a few worms there, look, you can see them going through the top. The fresh scraps are put into this top layer. Underneath, if we lift that off, we have a more processed layer. And then underneath there again, we have a much more finished layer. That's more like the end product. And underneath there again is the residue of the liquid, which can be drained out on a tap on the side. There we go. High quality worm juice. Compost worms are not earthworms. Compost worms live and feed on organic matter above the soil. They die in the soil. There's many different varieties. Red wrigglers, brandlings, tiger worms, African night crawlers, Indian blues. It doesn't matter which variety you use, they all do a great job. They eat their own weight every day. They excrete all this lovely material that's like a compost, sticky compost. And they also have a juice, a fluid that comes out of the worm farms that is a great liquid fertilizer. You can buy them online, you can buy them in the post, they send them to you in a tube. they double their population every 40 days. So it's easy to get up to a working population, and they moderate their population in relation to how much feed you give them. So it's a great little interaction between a little mobile element and the garden itself. Symbiosis in the urban gardening. This is a compost tumbler, and it's double-sided. One side's processing and almost processed, and another side is still getting additions. This is a system that's receiving organic waste from the local community in a community garden, and it's being tumbled quickly to get a fast process of compost. You got to be careful with tumblers. They must be continuously turned, and the material quality has to be checked. The right amount of nitrogen, the right amount of carbon, the right mix and the right moisture. This system has drains, so it drains the moisture quite well. It's a good innovation, and they are good innovations as long as you keep a check on the type of material. Continuously turning, they'll process material quickly. They take up very little space. That's the great advantage of a tumbler. And this can be then taken back to the community to plant fruit trees in the street. Now that's an even better innovation, because the end result is ongoing productivity in streetscape. Streetscape fruit trees, fertilised by the products from the cafes and food outlets here, through the community garden, compost made, and then fruit trees planted back with the same fertility right here in the sidewalk. That's what we need to see more of in the urban environment. Productivity directly in the street, where people walk and drive and interact in the commercial environment. Design in the urban space is so exciting. The elements are so tight, the productivity is so high per square metre, and the health generation is just magnificent. This is what will make our suburbs a really exciting, pleasant and healthy place to live. Let's go out and do it.